I realized that I deserved respect for my efforts, not constant criticism for trying to make our home a better place. Marriage isn't a fairy tale, it's a story you write day by day. Sometimes with love and laughter, other times with disagreements and hard lessons. I thought I understood that well. I thought I knew what it meant to build a life with someone. To weather both the quiet storms and the gentle moments together. But somewhere along the way, that understanding began to fracture, and I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about love, respect, and partnership. It's strange to think that house chores, small, everyday tasks, would become the foundation of a much larger divide, one that I could never have foreseen. When my wife, Julia, and I first moved in together, I expected an adjustment period. We were two different people, raised in two different households, with different ideas about how things should be done. I'd grown up in a home where cleanliness was next to godliness. My mother had drilled it into me, and as a result, I was always the kind of person who kept things neat and orderly. Julia, on the other hand, was a little more relaxed about it. She liked things clean but wasn't as meticulous. So, in the beginning, I took on the bulk of the housework without much complaint. It wasn't something I minded doing, and I figured that eventually we'd find a balance. But as time went on, I noticed that Julia's approach didn't change. If anything, she became more comfortable with me taking on the majority of the household responsibilities. I chalked it up to her busy schedule, at first long hours at work, projects that kept her late. I didn't mind picking up the slack. I wanted to be supportive, to make things easier for her. So, I did it all: the dishes, the laundry, vacuuming, even taking care of the groceries and cooking most nights. It became routine, a part of my day-to-day life. However, things started to shift when Julia began to make little comments. Subtle at first but growing sharper over time. She'd joke about how I was always cleaning, or how I was a little obsessive with keeping things tidy. I'd laugh it off, brushing her words aside, but they stung more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just the comments themselves, it was the tone, the undercurrent of mockery that I began to notice. One evening, as I was washing dishes after dinner, Julia stood in the doorway watching me with a smirk. She made some offhand comment about how my obsession with being a clean freak was amusing to her. Especially since, according to her, I was still a bit of a slob. I remember feeling a wave of irritation rising in me, but I swallowed it down, choosing to ignore her remark. But as the weeks turned into months, the comments kept coming. She'd laugh at the way I folded laundry, claiming that it didn't look as good as it could. She'd point out a small stain I'd missed on the countertop, or tell me that my vacuuming was half-hearted. It felt as though no matter how much I did or how much effort I put in, it was never good enough for her. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, doing the bulk of the chores, yet I was the one constantly being criticized for it. There were days when I wanted to say something, to call her out on her behavior, but I always stopped myself. I didn't want to create conflict. I convinced myself that it was just her sense of humor, that I was overreacting, taking things too personally. I told myself that I was doing this for the good of our marriage, that letting it go was the right thing to do. But the resentment continued to build, a slow simmer that I tried to ignore. Every time she made one of those remarks, I felt a little piece of my patience slip away. I began to feel like a stranger in my own home, doing things out of obligation rather than love. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being taken for granted, that my efforts were invisible, unappreciated, and worse, belittled. The final straw came one Saturday morning. I had spent hours deep cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing the floors, wiping down every surface, and organizing the pantry. I was exhausted but proud of the work I'd done. When Julia came into the kitchen, I expected at least a small acknowledgement, maybe even a "thanks for doing this." Instead, she looked around, nodded, and said, "It looks decent, but I'll probably have to go over it later to really get it clean." Her words cut through me like a blade. All the frustration I'd bottled up came rushing to the surface, and I felt a surge of anger I hadn't experienced before. I wanted to yell, to tell her how ungrateful and disrespectful she was being. But instead, I simply stood there, silent, letting the weight of her words sink in. In that moment, I realized that I couldn't keep doing this. Couldn't keep bending over backward for someone who couldn't see the effort, the care, and the love I poured into making our home a place of comfort and warmth. Over the next few days, I made a decision. I stopped doing the chores altogether. I left dishes in the sink. Let the laundry pile up. Didn't vacuum or tidy up. At first, Julia didn't seem to notice. But as the days went on and the mess began to build, her attitude shifted. She started making comments about how the house was getting out of hand. How things looked messy. I simply nodded, saying nothing, waiting to see if she'd take any initiative. But she didn't. Instead, she doubled down on her complaints, subtly blaming me for the state of our home while still making no effort to clean it herself. It was as if she expected me to give in, to return to my role as the silent caretaker who kept everything running smoothly. But I was done. I was tired of being both criticized and relied upon, of being told I was doing things wrong while still being expected to do them all. Finally, one evening, she confronted me. She asked why I'd let everything go, why I'd stopped caring about the house. I took a deep breath, looked her in the eye, and told her the truth. I told her how her comments had worn me down, how I felt unappreciated and disrespected, how her constant criticism had made me feel like nothing I did was good enough. I told her that I was tired of being mocked, of being made to feel like a slob, despite doing all the work. She didn't take it well. She accused me of overreacting, of being too sensitive, even of trying to make her look bad. But I stood my ground, refusing to back down this time. I told her that I deserved respect, that my efforts should be recognized and valued, not belittled and dismissed. For the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes, a momentary glimpse of remorse. But it was fleeting, quickly replaced by defensiveness. In the days that followed, we barely spoke. The silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken tension and unresolved hurt. I knew that our marriage was at a crossroads, that we would either have to address these issues head-on or continue drifting apart. But after everything, I wasn't sure if she was willing to change, if she could see beyond her own need to be right. I'd always believed that marriage was about partnership, about lifting each other up and valuing each other's contributions. But in that silence, I began to question whether our marriage had ever truly been a partnership or if I had simply been playing a role she expected of me. I wondered if, in trying to keep the peace, I had allowed her to erode my sense of self-worth, to chip away at my confidence bit by bit. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything, I realize that something fundamental has shifted within me. I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my self-respect for the sake of avoiding conflict. No longer willing to be the silent, unseen force holding everything together without recognition. I don't know what the future holds for us, whether we'll find a way to rebuild or if this is the beginning of the end. But one thing is certain. I'm done being mocked. Done with the constant belittling. I deserve better. And for the first time, I'm ready to fight for it.